So it's late January, still in the winter, and a pretty old rough day today. We're going to talk about an invisible hazard. Hello there and welcome. So when we talk about hazards, as you can probably read in roadcraft, we talk about three main types. We talk about the physical features of the road structure itself, bends, hills, crests, junctions, etc. And then we talk about the position of movement of other road users, the risks that they may present to us. And then of course there's the weather. And one weather we're looking at today, especially in light of recent storms, is the wind. Well, of course the wind itself is invisible. We can't see it, but we can see its effects. As a motorcyclist, we're probably more susceptible to the wind than other road users. Of course, drivers of high-sided, large vehicles are very susceptible to strong winds as well because they create a bit of a sail. Car drivers probably don't consider it quite as much. I've noticed over the years, it seems that a lot of road users these days don't take into consideration the weather conditions. This was particularly obvious to me one day when I was coming home from work after an unexpected snowfall, which came in quite suddenly. And as I was trying to work my way down a dual carriageway very gently, there was a van about a car's length behind me. And it makes you wonder what goes through people's minds when they're operating vehicles and they just cannot see what these risks are. So what do we need to do and consider when we're on a motorcycle and the weather is pretty rough, pretty windy? So the first thing to consider is have a look at the weather forecast, work out the wind speed, the overall wind speed, and also the gusting. The gust speed is very important, very critical. And secondly, do you actually need to make that journey on your motorcycle? Because if you don't and you're not sure, it's best just not to bother. But of course there's people who are at work with their motorcycles and they have to get home and the wind starts and maybe they've got no other form of transport, and some people just have to do a journey and that's the end of it. As you can see, the weather today is very wet and it is rather gusty and windy in places. So I always like to consider first of all the type of motorcycle that I'm riding. Now for many of us, many people, you have one bike and that's the end of it. You don't get a choice in that. Now I find these big touring bikes, strangely, are nicely planted in the wind, and you could say, well, it's a big screen, it's a big fairing, you're quite slab-sided, doesn't the wind catch you? Well, it does, but I've noticed over the years with the RTs that because they're fairly weighty, they feel fairly planted. But yeah, they do cop the wind. Now I've also noticed some bikes cop the wind more than others. Very difficult for me to say exactly which is which. I mean, you'll have to experience that yourself. You'd assume that big, large touring bikes would catch the wind badly, and you would assume that lighter, naked adventure bikes maybe catch it less. Aerodynamics is quite a subject, and I am not a scientist. I don't have a degree in aerodynamics. And so it's very difficult for me to comment precisely. I can only speak over the years from my experience. But I do find that generally speaking, on a lighter bike, it's more problematic because a wind gust can suddenly take you. Of course that's true of any bike, but I have found riding a smaller, lighter bike less comfortable in very strong winds. So when you talk about fairings on a motorcycle, you could sort of argue, are they helpful or are they unhelpful in windy conditions? I can honestly say I've done pretty well with these big fixed fairings over the years. I mean, I can feel the wind blowing against me today. Not really an issue for me at the moment, but I am conscious of it. I remember an accident many years ago on a dual carriageway, and from memory it was a cruiser bike with one of these bigger screens that's fitted to the handlebars. And if I recall correctly, the rider said he felt the bike just suddenly lost control. And I think the conclusion from it was a wind gust had got behind the screen and it had turned his bars because the bike had suddenly veered off its line. Now, I've not ridden bikes with screens fixed to the bars. I either ride naked bikes, semi-faired bikes or fully faired bikes as a rule, and I've found them all to be pretty stable, generally speaking, in the winds that I've ridden in. So today I can feel that wind. It's sort of pushing into my right shoulder almost from about the 2 o'clock position, you know, and I can just feel it just buffeting a little bit, but I'm not particularly concerned. Now, having checked the weather forecast today, I can see that the gusts are probably high 30s, early 40s in places. You can just feel it there. So geographically, as you ride, you want to be just aware of your surroundings. Where you're shielded means that probably the wind's not going to get you and it's fine. So think about, where is the wind direction? Where is your shielding? But then look for obvious areas where that shielding's no longer going to protect you. So we can see we've got some quite open fields there to our right, a reasonable amount of shielding here to the left. Other areas to be particularly concerned about are high bridges, naturally, and valleys where the wind can suddenly come through. And anyway, if you're in town, you know, you're often shielded by buildings, but what about the breaks in those buildings? I do a lot of training by the seaside, and if the wind comes off of that sea, you can be in the high street and it can whip up through one of those side roads and it can suddenly catch you. And we have heard of motorcyclists whose road position is suddenly changed from a nice neutral, almost near side position, almost to the white line. So you do need to be very cautious of what is around you, where that wind might get to you. So today, the wind is not so considerable for me on this bike that I'm having to make any large effort to control my machine in any way different to normal. I'm just aware of it, I can hear it, and it is what it is. But you will sometimes get winds so strong that you almost just have to lean into them a little bit. One of the keys to riding a motorcycle, particularly in those awful windy conditions, is don't get too tense. Let your body stay relaxed. You may need to grip and increase your pressure on the bars or on the tank or on the seat if you're riding a scooter from time to time, but generally speaking, try not to just bring tension into all of your body through the entire ride. You need to be flexible, and it's very difficult sometimes to anticipate exactly where or when that sudden gust of wind will come from. So you need to be able to respond to it very, very promptly. So I've had a situation where the wind has suddenly caught me and I've immediately made a correction to the handling of the bike. And I generally find that counter steering or push steering, a little bit of pressure on the handlebar in the correct direction, brings that bike back to where it should be. And that's another reason why your body should be flexible, because it's much easier to steer a motorcycle at speeds using your counter steering if your arms are relaxed and you have plenty of movement, forward movement in those arms. If you're very rigid with high shoulders and locked elbows, you'll find that a lot more difficult. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn right here, and I'm suggestive that that will probably give us a bit more of a headwind. So at the moment, no zero wind effects at the moment. And away we go. Beautiful day. Now I can really feel that wind, I can really hear it here. It's a little bit more open. And of course, with the heavy rain, we've got a lot of water on the road surface, so we need to be aware of stopping distances, keeping it smooth as always. One of the questions I get asked about riding in the rain, and I always say you've got to keep your controls smooth, maybe extra smooth, but you should always ride smoothly anyway, of course. See here, it's all fairly reasonable. Now I can feel that quite strongly there. I just feel it having a go at me, and I can feel the bike moving a little bit left and right. Having said that, my body's completely relaxed. I'm sometimes just making almost micro adjustments with the way that I'm moving my body, my knees, my arms on the bars. And I suppose that's years of experience, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to describe exactly how that is taking place. But they're very gentle, they're very small, they're not panicked, they're not rushed. When you've been riding for a while, you tend to get a bit of a feel for the bike. Now, one of the other important factors that we must consider in this sort of weather is flying debris. The stronger the wind, the more the chances. You know, if you're out and about in a residential area and you see it's wheelie bin day, the old dust carts collecting, just be careful. They're going to get blown across the road very likely. You don't want to be hitting one of those, even if they're one of the smaller ones. And of course, a lot of tree, leaf debris and other debris may already be blown into the road. So assessing the road surface ahead is an important one. Today we've got surface water to consider as well. So we're looking well up that road, scanning that road surface as part of our hazard scanning for just about everything else you can think of. I mean, very often you'll get leaf mulch as well, so when the weather's really appalling, leaves will blow more into the road, they'll all mulch down with this rain as well, and it's very unpleasant. The other thing you want to consider in extremely strong winds is flying branches and twigs and things that may be blown partially across the road and might be sticking out. Generally a higher risk in those conditions. Now, I can feel the wind getting quite strong here, and I know the road, and I know that in a moment I'm going to be across a completely open field. So what do we do about our road positioning? Because road positioning, being the first phase of IPSCA and mentioned in OSM PSL, are systems to ride, or a hybrid thereof, road positioning is critical. So what I tend to do in these conditions is still considering all the factors that I would normally consider, but with an extra level of inbuilt security. So in other words, I won't get too close to the near side verge, and I won't get too near to the white line. Because what I need to do is build in a little bit of protection in case that wind moves me across. Now, I can feel that really strongly in my right hand side. It's coming across that field there beautifully. And I don't know if you can notice, my bike is actually just slightly leaning into the wind now. I'm just using a slight lean on that bike, and I can feel the wind. It's very, very steady, pushing me to my left. So I've just got a very slight input to keep it on course. And what I'm wondering and waiting for is a sudden gust. Are we going to get one? It's fairly steady at the moment with not a lot of relaxation. Yeah, it's very strong there. I don't know if you can see, the bike's just moving. Oh yeah, the bike's just moving a little bit there for us. And yet again, everything I've described, micro little inputs with the body. Now I'm going to relax again because I've got those bushes. They're obviously making a big difference. See, I feel quite comfortable here. That's not too bad at all. Quite a lot of surface water there, judging by what's going on. If you're not used to it, it can be scary sometimes. And I suppose, absolutely, if it's very, very strong winds, then it's scary whether you're experienced or not, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know the effects if it's going to be that sudden. So here, am I likely to get more wind? I mean, it looks pretty open again now. And we've got large vehicles coming, so they can block the wind temporarily and create additional drafts of their own. As I say, there's a bus coming. That'll be a temporary block, and then there'll be an extra gust, I expect, as it passes. But I'm not stressed about it. I've got a light standard grip on my handlebar grips. I might use the gears a little bit more, so I might try and keep those gears a little bit more flexible than usual. I just like to be able to have good control always at the throttle, so the revs are a little bit higher than if I was just cruising along here following this car without a care in the world. I'm just using a slightly lower gear just so that I can be a little bit more responsive on that throttle if I need to be. Now you could say if the gear's too low and the roads are wet, surely you're going to get a worse response at the back wheel. You're more likely to have wheel slip. Yeah, okay, if that gear is absolutely too low, you're quite right, it will do. So as with everything that we do on a bike, it's all about the balance, compromise, and being mindful of what we're doing. It's your level of thought that's going to help you massively in these rough conditions. If you're ever in any doubt as to which way the wind's blowing, the way the rain's coming off the road in that car gives you a clear showing of that, doesn't it? And it is quite strong along here as well. I have on occasions made myself like a little bit smaller. I might just compress my body a little bit, lean forward, almost like a sports bike position, try and make myself a smaller target. I could always consider dropping the screen down, see if that made any difference on this bike. You've probably noticed the noise gets a lot more, and I'm bodily feeling a little bit more wind. It actually feels worse here. Let's put it back up again, see how we go. So we're in a 30 limit now. Let's just have a little chat about screens, fairings. So as we said earlier on, maybe the assumption is a fairing is a good thing, maybe it isn't. Naked bikes generally tend to give you much cleaner air in general day-to-day riding. You don't get turbulence on the helmet, you don't feel turbulence on the body. You get pressure, you feel the wind of course, but every bike seems to bring something unique when it comes to aerodynamics when you introduce fairings and screens. A lot of people think that a larger screen on the motorcycle will give them more protection and more peace and quiet, and sometimes the opposite is true. The whole thing about having helmet shake, turbulence, noise in your ears can be dependent on so many factors when it comes to aerodynamics. Very difficult to say exactly what causes what, but some of the considerations would be that a screen is too thin and it flexes. It may just be at the wrong angle for you, the rider. Your helmet will contribute massively to the amount of noise that you receive in your ears, as will whether you wear a under chin muffler, a little protector like this one's got on. It's got a summer and a winter one. You put the winter one, it really reduces the noise quite nicely. And it's even silly things like neck tubes, the way that your collar is designed on your jacket, whether you've got things on your shoulders, maybe like my camera, you know, or if you're wearing a rucksack and you've got those straps. There's so many factors that contribute to noise and vibration on your helmet. So I remember years ago, I used to have an old Kawasaki KZ1000P with a fixed screen on it, nice old bike from America. If I wore my Schubert C2 full face flip front helmet, my head used to vibrate at 60 miles an hour. It was a horrible vibration. If I put on an open face helmet, I was absolutely fine. It completely cleared it, and that was an open face helmet with those little peaks on, like you used to have back in the day. So there's a lot of variances there. So as I come into the more residential area, I'm looking for different types of debris. I'm just looking for anything that might be flying around, to be honest. I mean, you might even sometimes see little signs blown into the road, you know. Some of them are plastic, aren't they? Those temporary signs that someone's put up and they've come loose. You don't want to be going over them, they're going to be slippery. If you're braking or accelerating or cornering on them, they're likely to move. So you're looking for all manner of things in that respect. I remember when I was 16 and first started riding bikes, I actually really enjoyed riding in rough weather. I saw it as a bit of a challenge. I had some really nice kit, despite it being 1985. There was some nice kit around, not as good as today maybe. I remember I had an all-in-one rucker waterproof suit, and it was incredibly warm and cosy, very, very nice. I had no problem going out in the awful weather at all. And I think the only thing that I don't like about going out in awful weather is sometimes if the risk is too high and you think what could happen. And the other thing is when you get home you've got to clean your bike and it's in everything and it's filthy. But you know, I quite enjoy riding in a bit of rough weather. I quite like it. Character building. So we're going to head up towards the seafront now and just see if the weather up there is any more interesting. So I don't know if you noticed there, I had to make a little correction whilst I was at a stand. When you're coming to a stop and weather's particularly rough like this, consider which foot you want to put down and consider whether you want to put both feet down. Now of course if you put both feet down, your front braking has got to be absolutely pitch perfect, because if you're too strong and heavy with it, it'll cause you a further problem. I know that my video which foot down has had quite a lot of views and quite a few comments. People have very fixed opinions sometimes on which foot you put down. It's all about planning. I know a guy from the States that said you're always going to put 2 feet down in whatever state he lives in because the winds are so strong they'll just take you off without even thinking about it. Well, you know, if you do live in that environment and you are used to that type of weather, then that's what you do. You know, that's part of your planning. I mean, I'm not going to just do something by default out of bad habit, because I think that leads to problems, because it stops you thinking. It's nice to be highly accomplished as a rider and have those thoughts that work very slickly, and of course the more that you practice thinking and being intelligent and responsive to the circumstances around you, the more easy it's going to be for you to make those decisions, because that's the way your brain learns to work. See, as I come around that corner I get hit quite strongly there. Nothing that's awful for me today. On a little moped, would it have made a difference? Maybe it would. I would say that we're not in the worst of it today, although it's fairly breezy. It's interesting that this section here, the wind actually feels quite changeable. I mean, one thing that is particularly unpleasant can be crosswinds, because they're highly unpredictable. One minute they're one way, next minute the next. So you do have to be very in tune to what's going on around you. But what I tend to do, as described earlier, is keep myself relaxed and just pick up on what's happening and just make those micro adjustments to the handling of the machine where that's necessary. I think the other thing to say as well is that if it is particularly awful, if you're focusing on being anxious or nervous about what could happen, what might happen, you're probably concentrating less on the road and the circumstances that you need to respond to than maybe is ideal. It's a bit like when people go for tests and I say, look, if you focus exclusively on what you're doing on your bike, reading that road, you'll be less nervous about your test than if you think about how nervous you are about being on your test and go and do something wrong or not quite right on your test. And I think it's the same when you're riding in conditions that are less than ideal, that ordinarily and quite understandably may pique anxiety in some riders, you know. Understandable, absolutely get it. But if you can get your brain to focus on the job in hand, you'll find that a lot of that anxiety becomes diminished. It'll become a lot less prevalent and you'll do a better job of what you're doing. So we're just approaching a dual carriageway now, and they can very often be very windy. So let's see how we get on along here. I tend to find as well, when you've had a lot of very, very wet weather and then you get strong winds, especially when trees have got lots of leaves on them, they're quite resistant to the wind, and the wind can very often blow them down. When I'm riding, when I'm driving, I've always got my eyes partially on the side of the road as well, looking for tree movement, anything that might look a little bit out of the ordinary, when you can't focus exclusively on it, of course, because there's a lot going on the road, but it's still part of the package. So one thing we haven't mentioned is speed. Should you adjust your speed because of the conditions? Well, of course you should. You can't be so slow that you pose a risk from traffic behind you, but you've also got to make sure that your speed is relevant to the conditions. So I will moderate my speed from the top, from the max, if those weather conditions suggest it's prudent to do so. If it's very, very windy, I don't want to be at full pelt, because it gives me less time, less chance to respond to a given situation that something might go wrong. It's like now I can feel that wind blowing across very strongly on the left arm. But I've got nice wide lanes here, and I'm also conscious that currently I've got no traffic around me. So if I did have to sort of move the bike, if the bike did get moved by the wind, at the moment it's no great drama if I'm fairly central in my lane or fairly central on the actual dual carriageway. You know, you can see I'm riding a little bit nearer the white line here. Two reasons: the wind, secondly, you've got a junction here and it keeps me out the way of that should anything start to go wrong. At the end of the day, the road's yours if you're not affecting anybody else, but you need to be particularly awake to make sure that your position isn't going to compromise your safety in another respect. I would also give consideration as well to having your visor down when it's particularly windy and you've got the risk of stuff blowing around. What you don't want is to get hit in the face with flying debris, twigs, etc. That would not do you any good at all. One other thing worthy of note: luggage, panniers, top boxes and winds. So a lot of bikes I've ridden over the years, I've ridden with panniers, and I prefer panniers to top boxes, mainly because they keep the weight lower down. It doesn't affect my centre of gravity so much. So you'll notice that some manufacturers say that you can have a top box but not panniers, or you can have panniers but not a top box. Not all, but some bikes will say that. And the other thing that you'll often see where luggage is concerned is reductions in speed. Now that's all to do with weight and aerodynamics, balance, etc. But if you've got larger, higher items, you may find, especially with strong winds and turbulence, there may be some additional considerations in strong winds. Now, I'm not a professor of physics or aerodynamics, but I do know over the years, anecdotally and from experience, that luggage can affect you to some degree when it comes to aerodynamics. So it's something to think about. But you may find in your experience that it doesn't have a great bearing on it, and I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say about that. So in summary then, strong winds. Check your weather forecast, look out your window, look at flagpoles, look at trees, look at anything that moves, see what's going on. You decide if your journey is worth it, necessary or not. And then when you're out there, be flexible, keep yourself loose, make micro adjustments where necessary to help you with the weather. Think about your road positioning. Yet again, be flexible. Your road positioning may well be different on a windy day to a normal day, because you want those extra margins of safety in case you do get suddenly blown one side or the other. Look out for debris, be very aware of the risks that poses, and as usual, keep it smooth. So until next time, ride safe and take care.